The prosecution was trying to stop the legal center Lesvos from actually even being their legal representation. And they were, even though it's enshrined in EU and Greek law that you have a right to choose your representation, they were trying to force them to take a state issued representative. And legal center Lesvos had a fight to ensure that they could represent them. Right from the beginning of the trial, everything was fucked.
Massive fire. And people are escaping. People are running away from the fire with little things that they managed to grab. And the police just stops them, builds a wall, puts those cars and buses there to stop them from approaching the town where they can get some resources, where they can get food, water, where they can maybe stay.
That's what makes me really scared here as a refugee in Europe, is that if I'm in a situation like that, I need a big lawyer. I mean, in their case, they should just get a normal lawyer if everything was fair around them. And they would just get out, no evidence.
Welcome back to Fractured, another episode about Moria 6. We just did one, but we really had to bring you an update on the situation. Just last week, a juvenile court in Lesvos exonerated 3 of Moria 6 from all of the things that they were accused of, namely setting fire on Moria camp. And we're bringing you this information simply because there are so many additional things that we didn't speak about in our previous episode and are so much worth mentioning. And one of the things is that the piece we spoke about, a forensic architecture piece that was part of the line to defend Moria 6, was a very important piece that was presented. And we, as ReFOCUS, specifically our citizen journalists, were part of this specific piece of media. Our citizen journalists on Lesvos back in 2019 and 2020 created lots of media pieces for any of the gigantic corporations, media corporations, from CNN, BBC, The Guardian, you name it. One of those things, however, was extremely significant, and this was this piece for forensic architecture, because it allowed them to track the places where the fire in Moria started, how it changed, and to actually show that most probably those boys who were convicted were innocent. We're going to talk a little bit about this today, and we have a very interesting and special guest today, because it's our own Douglas Herman, who actually created the citizen journalism project of ReFOCUS Media Labs. And so, Doug, tell us why did it happen, and what was the impulse for creating a citizen journalism project?
Well, thank you first for the honor of being on the show with you guys.
It was so unexpected.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen you. So, yeah, thanks. It's guys, you look taller, Rashid.
Yeah.
Chair.
He grew up.
Okay.
Chair effects.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned in the lead-in is really true. This is an amazing development. When the news finally hit, it was it just changed my mindset for I think for life in general. That finally there was something good that happened, and finally some sort of justice was served, and that these boys were out of prison. And
because they were in prison for such a long time, and we're talking about minors. Almost all of them were minors when the first conviction happened, right? So if you imagine, what is it? Was it 3 years, basically?
No, 5
years.
5 years.
5 years in prison when you're 16.
Within less than a week of the fires in 2020 in September, they were already. This is one of the first pieces of evidence for Legal Center Lesvos that defended them to say, well, even your own, migration minister has condemned them to being guilty of something before you even arrested them. He made statements on social media that we got them and they're already going to be deported and blah, blah, blah. And it sounds a lot like the bullshit we see in the news
Yeah,
today.
because there was a lot of pressure, right, on showing some. It was gigantic. It was all over news. Lesvos was on the news again and again for bad reasons. So there was a lot of pressure probably from the government side to simply, try to find somebody.
Scapegoat,
Scapegoat,
They immediately scapegoated these 6 boys. 5 of which were actually under 17, were legal minors. They were not 18 yet. And one of them had just turned 18, basically. So he, just like Jesus, like just terrible. But 2 of them immediately were charged as juveniles and the other 4 were charged as adults. And that's where the drama starts, because that's why this shit lasts for 5 years. But they were all like basically convicted within less than, so they're basically convicted in the court of public appeal, or approval, or just like way that in Greek society, everyone's just like, oh, we got him. Yeah, wonderful. And then they wouldn't let go of that. And there was no real evidence for them to be in there. So no matter what the legal procedures were to try to refute this type of procedural errors, that they were even being tried in the wrong courts, that's really why we get this result later. But it's 5 years later.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy.
But also, of course, it's not going to give them back those lives they already lost, but they now have a right to actually sue the government for all the years, right, that they spent. This would be...
Who's going to give you back your life, especially as a kid?
It's not... Okay.
5 years.
I know it's not a nice thing maybe to say, but yes, it was horrible for them. 5 years in prison, they were the minors were in and out, right? For one trial, then it started again.
They basically were. All of them were basically in for at least 3.5 years of their life.
Yes,
but their reputation also.
Yeah. I know.
Your whole life you're gonna be.
It's not gonna give them back this time. However, if media cover this trial with some decent attention, there is a chance that they're going to be compensated fairly, right? Meaning not with some bullshit we're going to give you 4,000 euros
not when you
or something, but maybe,
this Turkish
it's going to take another 5 years.
Was kicked back to Turkey and she got 20,000 euros and she was like, what is that?
I think it's going to take another 5 years so they can make them give up on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just going to push it again and again and again, use everything in every cause they can think of. But I think that, okay, they can take the money, but what I want, and I know some of them maybe they will want, those people that put them in jail, they should go to jail. Just taste the venom.
But it doesn't work this way, right?
But
the prosecutor had
but
some
we're living
evidence.
in a life
those were very weak
where
evidence.
the rules don't matter anymore. So let's just rewrite these rules. We really are. I'm sorry.
Guys, you and your vengeance all
no,
the time.
No, vengeance. It's legally.
It's justice.
You put me to jail for...
You're you just take 6 boys and you destroy their lives. And what's the consequence? Nothing? You get to go live on the island that you came from. You get to go back.
You can
go back to Chios and just live with his family.
Job
no problem.
to put other people in jail.
I'm one of the last person on earth who would like to defend the prosecutor and the Greek legal system. But,
right, but so what?
But it's just fair.
There were some evidence, extremely weak evidence. First of all,
evidence.
But the issue is
not.
No, if you guys prove that this was intentional, it was intentional.
Yeah, when you convict me before the court, it was personal, intentional.
I love that you're playing devil's advocate here because you're letting us go off.
Yeah, go for it. I mean,
Guys, if you prove that it was intentional, that they didn't know, that they knew that those boys were innocent, yet they still decided to do it, then yes, by all means.
When you have no evidence, no evidence, what do you call you? What do they call you? Innocent. So they know that they were innocent. You have no
Those evidence were extremely weak. I think this is the third time I'm saying it, but they were in writing. Yes.
Okay, so the actual evidence is that it was one testimony by someone who was from a rival tribe of Afghans. All the boys are Hazara, and the man who was never appeared in court ever, never ever in 5 years. And there's multiple cases of repeals and all sorts of everything. They never presented him. That's it. There's just this one testimony. The fire department's actual report refutes this testimony. even before the forensic architecture piece that we worked with with them on, like even before that comes out to recreate the situation, it's already been proven that the testimony is improper because he's claiming that a section of the camp burned down, which didn't happen. They had no actual knowledge of the real identities of the boys. He just random descriptions. Then the police officers who were supposedly the other people who knew what they looked like, they claimed that they were very short, that they were, and he's just describing
Wearing
the
red hoodies or
average
something.
teenage Afghan boy in the camp. And then the defense in the first trial asked one of the boys to stand up, and he was literally a head taller than the police officer who said he was a short person. There was no evidence, literally no evidence. And if you think about this, if you just think about these types of cases where beyond a reasonable doubt and all of our general structure of due process, as well as how you can be convicted of a crime, none of this is present. It's like you want to talk about banana court justice. Like, this is insanity what happened in these cases. And if you really start reading into them, it's disgusting what you find.
We know that this is not the only one. So,
But I thought that he mentioned names. I didn't know. He
didn't even know them.
Descriptions.
He gave names like
Ali,
Muhammad.
like everyone
seriously,
is,
like he
yeah,
gave
if you go
names
to
that are like the
Syria,
most,
like Muhammad, like you
Yeah.
can find it. So, but what do you think the fair punishment for the prosecutor? Like, just
okay, I'm not gonna go there because
lose his job at
Yeah,
least.
they should be disbarred. They
At
should
least.
lose their.
of
At
course they should
least.
investigate what kind of evidence he had, and it was he, right? And whether it was justifiable. At least there should be some kind of disciplinary punishment if this was so evident that those boys were innocent, yet he decided to prosecute. Yet we know that this is not going to happen, right, in Greece. Like, we heard about so many cases of people who like were sentenced based on like absolutely like such small and unreliable sources.
Just like this case.
But
right?
yes, but like
So-
I think here's the thing. Those boys were in a sense lucky because of the scale of the fire, right? It was gigantic. It put down a massive, the largest actually camp in Europe. It was all over the news, absolutely everywhere. And everything that happened later, those 2 weeks, people living on the streets, non-stop reporters on the streets of Mytilene. So they had to like do something, right? Those boys were lucky in the sense that somebody took care of their case, like properly.
Sure.
Several organizations, Greek lawyers. So it was like too big, right? There are other cases where people do not have this luck,
Yeah, no, they have to
they're
fight.
in a
They have
similar
to fight to get this
situation, but-
representation. There was a really interesting thing that was happening that the prosecution was trying to stop the legal center Lesvos from actually even being their legal representation, and they were, even though it's just enshrined in EU and Greek law that you have a right to choose your representation, they were trying to force them to take a state issued representative, and legal center Lesvos had a fight to ensure that they could represent them. Right from the beginning of the trial, everything was fucked. It was like unbelievable. But to go back to this original question, which was about like how did the citizen journalism program start? It was all under, I would argue that it was under duress. It was under the reality of what was happening to our community and to our students. And if you remember, as you were there, you know that within a week of this hyper-intensive media coverage, it was just empty. It was gone. Within a day, it was just one day, everyone was there, and then the next day, everyone was gone. And then there was no coverage. And there's never been coverage since. So now you have like no understanding of what's really going on. And so the fire happened, and then they built this other piece of shit camp that just didn't have running water for like 9 more months. It was like insanity what people were living through. And that temporary camp is still there 5 years later, and you have no eyes on the ground anymore. Now it's behind a military line. Now you have drones and you have modern surveillance, and like we showed in the last episode, where you see inside in Moria 6 film, where you see inside the control room, where they show this like, it's like almost like, I feel like you're watching Dr. Strangelove. It's really creepy.
But Doug, this was not the beginning of the citizen journalism, because it started during COVID.
Yeah, of
remember?
course, yeah. But like, again, it's like under duress of like what's happening to the community when all the people were forced into the camp and they couldn't come out. Everybody forgets about the arson that destroyed our school the week before COVID hit, and everybody just forgot about the fact that people were terrorizing refugees on the island and pulling people out of cars, and grandpas attacking people. Like, it was insanity on that island, for Nazis coming down, flying in to defend their Greek brothers. It was really, really crazy shit. And during that time, refugees were literally being hunted by these people who wanted to hurt them, and journalists as well, and people getting shot at by like the people on farms with shotguns because they're walking down the street. It was really, really hectic. And then COVID. It locks them in the camp, and then they have no ability to go out, no protections. And at that time, this is March 2020. Everybody thinks that this thing is going to kill everybody. So the Greek government is celebrating themselves for putting all the people in the camp and keeping Greek society safe, but they're leaving all these people in super, super close quarters. At that time, the population on the island was a whole lot higher than 13,000 when it burns down 9 months later. We were pushing 25,000 at its peak. And you got all these people in there waiting in these cattle queues and behind these barbed wires and metal bars to get food that have worms in it. And it's like, go back, no doctor, no place to deal with any symptoms. It was so in that capacity, in that time period, the media couldn't get in to tell that story, but we were in, and our community had the skills. So that's the duress I'm talking about. We were training people to be filmmakers and writers and actors and camera operators and directors, and then in the end they were like, now we have nothing, so what are we going to do with our tools and our skills and our experience? And now we have a story we have to tell. That's how it started, and it was an unfortunate necessity, is my argument.
You said that they were lucky that they found so many organizations that they wanted to help them, defend them. And that's what makes me really scared here as a refugee in Europe, is that if I'm in a situation like that, I need a big lawyer. I mean, in their case, they should just get a normal lawyer if everything was fair around them. And they would just get out, no evidence. But because refugees, and you need, the Greek government were attacking them and everybody was attacking them. So you need something very big, and just makes me scared. Like, what if I am in a situation, misunderstanding? So do I need like a huge organization to defend me? Because it's not fair. They should have been dealt with as if they are Greek teenagers, and one lawyer look at the evidence, but like Doug said, conviction before even going to court. But I want to go back to like the beginning. So because now we see there is the fire, they were accused, but when it happened that night, I want you to take us to that night. Both of you were there, right? So
I wasn't. My leg was broken.
What?
My foot was broken.
What was it? Like, there is a fire. Did you think there's gonna be something like that?
No.
They're gonna be accused?
To be honest, it was, I would argue that that's the before, these types of epochs, the before and after. I would say before that time, we knew how to get a good night's sleep. And after that night, I don't know how to sleep through a whole evening anymore. And and at that time period, it was really, really insane. I mean, and then the forensic architecture piece, they talk about how there were hundreds of fires, like almost 300 fires in the history of that camp leading up to this point. Wow. And I think the week of COVID starting, I remember we were already in lockdown, and all of our students were sending us this footage of what was going on, and it was a fire happened in the levels in these ISO boxes, and the woman took one of her kids to go take a shower, and she was worried about the safety of the other kids, so she locked the door, and a fire happened, and her daughter died. And this baby, this 6-year-old kid, burned to death. And then all of these images were hitting our phones. Like, what? Oh my God, what the fuck is this? And it was the picture of the charred baby. And it was like, oh my God, please stop sharing this. And dreadful. Everyone was sharing this footage. And, so there were hundreds of fires that were happening regularly. So it was totally normal for us to get messages from our students saying, hey, there's a fire. We're living on the island at the time. We're doing all this work regularly. I think we kind of normalized it like everyone else did. They normalized it in the camp. I don't think anyone really understood the severity of this fire. So then we started getting more and more messages in the middle of the night from our students saying, this is really bad. This is really bad. Oh my God, we're running to the mountain. We're getting out of here. And then we're losing connection with our students. And so now all night long, we're like freaking out. Now we're trying to figure out what's going on. We're trying to get in there, but we can't get into the area because it's being blocked off. I remember not sleeping at all that night after these messages, managing the messages, making sure that people were okay. It's, I think, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know, doing a piece to the camera, like to talk about what's really going on, and kind of relaying the information in as close to real time as we could with footage that our students were sending us from inside. And a lot of these clips were used in the forensic architecture report to eventually exonerate these boys of these false crimes, these charges.
Because
So
Doug, you said something very important about all of those fires that happened in Moria before. And I remember it was, I think, Dimitra from Forensic Architecture that said it, that the fire of Moria was a disaster, but it was a disaster designed because of everything that was going on in the camp and how it looked like. Do you remember how electricity looked like there? It was those dinging cables everywhere. People were like doing it. Like, people have no idea how electricity really works, but you know, they need electricity. They're like pulling them from whatever source.
they were
power
over
they
shorting
can.
these like connection boxes, and everyone kind of hijacking the electricity, plugging into it in any way, rediverting it, and but they were just doing it to have some sort of power. But this was all going into these like cardboard boxes and you know, like build your own tent survival type moment in the what they call the jungle, which is the sprawl outside of a military base camp meant for 3,000 people max. Maybe 1,800, 2,800, 3,000 maximum, and there's 25,000 people in the whole hillside,
during
right?
Corona.
And all of the olive groves that like go out of this region. But you take all that stuff aside, maybe everybody assumed at some point or another you'd have like a serious fire, but not one that would be like this, that would, and then not one that would, I think maybe we all assumed that at some point or another they would easily try to pin it on refugees and say the refugees started the fire. This was definitely part of their narrative, that refugees were a danger to everybody. This was a constant drumbeat from the Greek government, especially since 2019, when the current government came into power. But I mean, the way they reacted to it was like unbelievable. The way they just left all these people exposed to the dangers, didn't really protect them, stop them from coming into the town.
Exactly, because it was not that they didn't
use
manage
COVID as
to
an
protect
excuse
people.
completely. Wow,
They exposed them to danger.
Tourism happening.
And you know, this, like, again, this is one of those moments that I have like non-stop ever since we started doing humanitarian work, that there's such a lack of any type of fairness in this situation. I'm not only talking about the trial and so if you just imagine this specific, many other things, but also like this thing specifically that happened to the residents of Moria camp. So this massive fire. If you imagine this happening to residents of any village there, small town, right? Massive fire. And people are escaping. People are running away from the fire with little things that they manage to grab. And the police just stops them, builds a wall, puts those cars and buses there to stop them from approaching the town, where they can get some resources, where they can get food, water, where they can maybe stay, you know, with friends.
Yeah,
or
but
just
Sonia,
stopping.
it was like COVID, you know, we got to protect all the tourists from the COVID.
Oh,
The fuck, you know, like it was like unbelievable.
So this is for me so like, if you imagine if they would do this to locals, right? What kind of scandal this would be? Like what kind of outrage this would bring to this community? But nobody really said boo about it when this happened to people who were most vulnerable in this situation.
Like after the fires, like the weeks that followed, there's 2 weeks that people were left on the streets with nothing. And we could cut to the footage at some point if you want. Like, I saw people ripping into the ground to cut water lines that were going to like industrial buildings just to get some water. And like, this is not water you're supposed to drink. But this was the level of desperation. There was just nowhere to go to the bathroom. There was no water. There was no food. There were times that we would go past the police line by walking through the hills with food to bring in to all of our community members. And then other times we couldn't get in with humanitarian support, so we had to like go in as journalists. And then there were days you couldn't go in as journalists, so you went in as humanitarians. And there's this footage of like people getting vans in and then just throw in water packets, like 6 liter, the 6 packages of like 1.5 liters, like 6 of them, just throwing them out like this giant weight, just throwing them out of the back of the trucks. because the trucks were getting mobbed by all the people who were just so desperate for any water, any food. And the brutal irony of being left in the parking lot of a Lidl supermarket, which is closed, and you have no food, and you're
And the food
in a
is right
Lidl
there. Yeah.
supermarket parking lot. So this was just crazy. And then in town, everyone's going to cafes and going to the bars and having summertime.
Normal life.
Can I point out one thing? Because people really gathered in this like short, like, I don't know, it was not short, maybe 5 kilometers, 2 kilometers street. And predominantly next to one big Lidl shop and one big AB market. So all around. So they, of course, closed those things. Nobody was coming, none of the workers. People didn't get food for 3 days, food or water, yet nobody broke in to those shops.
Yeah.
They were open there. There was no security. Nobody.
There was no riot.
Nobody was.
No
Nobody
damage.
They
did
could
this.
have gone and
They were, sleeping on the parking lot of this Lidl. Nobody did anything, and they had, children. Like
you
little
could
children.
just
So
say,
I mean, just look at the
also
footage of
speaks a
like
little bit to
what the
humanity,
quote unquote
right?
civilized society did in the face of just mask mandates, and how like the madness that was happening in America and Europe because the government was telling them you had to wear a mask. And I was like always remarked, we always remarked where it was like shocking that this was not leading to a full blown riot where they would just break into the supermarket. Like it was just, but they never did. Nobody did. There was no violence.
Nothing.
There was no
Nothing.
attacks of any civilians. There was no mob of people rushing into the town to loot the stores. None of that happened. And it wasn't because the police blocked their doorway, that blocked their way. It was just like that was not the capacity of those people. There was not that's not who was there. They were just asking for help, and we didn't get any. They didn't get any of it. Right? It was really, really a terrible time. But this fire took place over the course of 2 days. It wasn't one, and this whole entire case of the Moria 6 is all centered around the first night. But the rest of the camp burns down on night 2.
Yep.
And I was inside when that happened. I was in the camp when it happened on the second day, because I went in during the daytime after we found a way to sneak in to just check on our students and see how everyone was, and we were going to all the different areas where we knew they lived and seeing what was damaged and how they were doing, and then what did they need, and then try to figure out needs assessments so that we could get resources into them. Where were they going to go? Tell us where, make sure we had an active number for them. Did their phones die? All the things. Like, what do you need? Batteries, power banks, food, sleeping clothes, what? Like, so we can go to the store and get it in, right?
Remember how
Holy
we had
shit,
those,
it was crazy.
We had those several extension cords, and we just charged every night power bank.
Yeah.
So you bring it the next day, and then you brought the next round, and we constantly had those gigantic stripes of extension cords for the power
and
banks.
we had a studio apartment, and it looked like a supermarket and a
Good that we didn't
Media
have
Markt
to
or something. It looked like a Best Buy for American audience members. I was like,
Good
it
that
was really
electricity was included in
Yeah.
the rent.
but I think it was a punishment to them. I think they blamed them before when it happened. Blamed them that they set it up, so they need to pay for it. So they need to stay there hungry. They need to stay there,
Yep.
but also
It's like a punishment.
yeah. So they
We
judged
see
them
the same thing
before.
happening now.
And you said
Gaza,
that they
like-
didn't break in. And you remember, I think it was in the US when COVID hits and people were in supermarkets fighting for toilet paper.
Right, just look at
Yeah.
the day of
Normal
Thanksgiving
people,
on
like
Black
they are
Friday.
just,
Yeah,
People treat each
Yeah.
other for freaking a deal on a television.
And people laughing like, yeah, it's Black Friday. Yeah, it's cheap. But for refugees, no, they cannot even get anything.
Yeah, but this is definitely part of the narrative, which was they did this, so therefore,
they need to pay for it.
you know, there's no way that in their mind that it wasn't the refugees who burned down the camp. That's
But it
They
happened
wouldn't
in
even,
many.
like,
It happened in
entertain
many
anything else.
villages in Greece where every year it happened in a village where they are trapped and there is a fire and people from everywhere they go there to help them and the police helping them and even that they call it a scandal. The Greek the press, they always call it a scandal. Oh, they didn't care of them. But what about these people here? They didn't get nothing. They didn't have 1% of what the Greeks are taking when there is a fire in a village. Yeah,
Yep.
it's crazy.
Absolutely.
And I would say that, you know, if you were a Greek on the island, you were helping if you were already helping refugees.
Yeah,
If you were not helping refugees prior to the fire, it wasn't like there was some new regenerated solidarity like there was in the beginning in 15 and 16 when the Greeks on the north of the island were saving people in the sea. We didn't see that happen again. We already crossed over the line. The Rubicon was crossed. Like everyone was now it was us versus them. And so the locals were just going about their business. The tourists were going about their
As if nothing
holidays, and everyone else was fucked.
Wow.
And the only people who were really helping, many Greeks were helping, but they were already engaged in the process of helping people. So I didn't see like some sort of like flip over to where this could have been a galvanizing moment for solidarity, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
So, Doug, the fire is on and your students are taking footage, but in their heads, it's not for a case or something. They just filming, documenting everything. So how was it difficult to gather all this information, and how did it contribute to being later in this big documentary?
Yeah, so I think, at this time, the fire happens in September. They've been in 6 months of like journalistic, document everything and collaborate with media. As Sonia was saying earlier, like every day from the beginning of the lockdown until the fire, because the lockdown through the summer continued. Now, once the lockdown was lifted and tourists could come back to the island and stuff, and so there was more movement for people who were not refugees, but the refugees were kept in the camp. We were teaching in a garage across the street. So we were working with them on a daily basis on documenting, doing work reports with other journalists who were coming to the island. So we were constantly in journalistic mode during those months. And we were creating a nice system of an archive of just like the camp and everything that was happening and all the issues that they were facing. So from water, lack of medical hygiene issues, violence, electrical issues, fires, all sorts of other things that were happening to people. This was a constant process. And so we had this archive that was evolving every day, unrelated to the fire. So when the fire happened, they just kept doing what they were normally doing. They were just constantly telling the story of Moria, and they were doing it in a way that was actually getting a lot of traction. And I would again say, similar to what you were saying before, the fire and the severity of it potentially became a benefit for these boys once they were wrongfully accused. And COVID happening and everyone getting locked in and the media getting locked out and no travel, that also, because of how big of an issue it was, that helped members inside the community get their voice heard. Prior to that, like no one gave a shit about anyone inside the camp saying anything other than you're a victim, you're a source of the misery, let's put you on camera talking about how bad it is. And then that was the end of the story. No one wanted to collaborate, no one wanted to help elevate anybody who had journalistic intentions or skills or media creation skills, or no, there was no collaboration prior to these problems. So the archive was existing, it was expanding, and then the fire happened and it just like tripled in size overnight. Wow. And then it was like, oh fuck, what are we gonna do here? And then almost immediately we started working with forensic architecture about it. Now, their report doesn't actually have an impact in the court case until like years later, because it wasn't even allowed in as evidence until they were just constant processes of like trying to block it legally. And then it was finally allowed in, and then it became kind of a central, it became
evidence,
very critical to changing the outcome of the case.
Because it puts like so many evidence together, right? Is the direction of wind, the report from firefighters, our students' footage, like this topographic view of Moria. But I think it's worth also mentioning in this context that the footage of our students was legit for this specific piece for forensic architecture, because we could give them all the metadata, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It was because, people send you lots of stuff and you said like, oh, fire here, fire there. But like, you cannot then create a timeline of those events. Well, if you can create like a timeline, yes, like you need those metadata, right?
It's attached into all the thing.
Yes, of course,
everything we're doing is a mobile cell phones inside the camp. And so they were all the metadata was used.
Yes.
And they were also, it wasn't just our footage, it was all the footage they could find. So the beauty of that new technology that they're doing is that they're able to really recreate a moment in time that's irrefutable.
Yes.
The beauty
of open
manipulatable.
resources.
It's not manipulated. It's not. This happened. This person was shot on this corner at this millisecond from this camera angle that was open sourced from a satellite somewhere. Like, we're in a very different world now where it's not just the CCTV. This is the beauty of this. It's not just the CCTV that's watching our every move on every street corner. it's the other way around too. Like you're gonna commit a crime, you're gonna do something of an injustice to someone. Someone's got a phone on your ass. Like someone's filming you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
George
is.
Floyd doesn't.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen if it's not for citizens with phones
Yeah.
filming everything that's going on. Like
Yeah, but on the other hand, with the AI development right now, so many things can be questioned. We know that some things
And
in
there's
court are not
also-
admissible.
But there's also media capacity to
Yeah.
do forensics to prove that there's AI
Exactly.
Yeah.
involved.
So
Yeah.
important.
So, in a legal sense, I feel like the burden of proof is that you have to provide evidence. And so, in the court of public opinion, on social media, you can get all sorts of people to believe anything. But in a court scenario, you have to actually have legitimate evidence,
Yeah.
right? So to speak, considering this case, like. When you go down the road, in almost all of these cases where people are being wrongfully accused of things, eventually it feels like justice is served, but it's delayed or deferred for so long that someone's life is fucked up to beyond recognition. Like
Yeah.
you spend 8 years in a prison while you're being wrongfully accused of something. Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, just we go back to the revenge stuff you're talking about before. Like the justice. It's like there's got to be some sort of legal consequence for people who push these false narratives. Otherwise, they'll just keep pushing them with,
course.
it's just there's no reason not to. It just serves their own purposes. So the fact that the footage that the students, honestly, like we sent this message when the case came back out to like let everybody know in the community they may not have been following it anymore because 5 years later, how are you really watching this that closely? Just like kind of thank them for their dedication to this work, to say, you may be questioning years later, why did I even do any of that work? Everyone went through highs and lows in that experience of documenting these situations. They would say they would work on a report. It would go out. It would get a lot of immediate play in social media in terms of views or clicks or impact, and then nothing would change in their lives. They're still stuck in the camp. They're still suffering the same problems and injustices. And, if you're in that position, you may give up or you may stop thinking that this even matters. Why should I bother filming this? Why should I bother talking about this? And they just kept going. And then the fact that they did meant that they were ready and they were able to document it when the big thing happened. And then then after that, they documented all the bullshit that happened on the street for 2 weeks. Then they documented all the bullshit in the new place, which is now the old place. 5 years later, still the same place. And they were, really able to have an impact. And so we were celebrating them to say, like, your effort, your energy, your dedication, your focus, it paid off. And you saved these boys' lives. If they didn't do
absolutely.
that, then I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Are they
You
still
know,
in prison?
It's still, we're always proud of our students. They're like pushing through all the problems, difficulties, obstacles. But like at this point, this was the highest point of problems, right?
This is so tense.
You're in a burning camp, and then you're living on a street for 2 weeks, not allowed to go even to a shop to get yourself a bottle of water. And they found it in them to just push, to just every day just record and document this situation. And I remember still Mustafa with this burning arm completely because he fell asleep after this fire, the first night of the fire. He was recording the whole night, but his tent did not burn. So he was very tired the next day. He fell asleep, and then he woke up when like his hand was basically burning, right? So he immediately escaped, but he had very bad burns.
Yeah.
Yet, like he was still, I mean, in a way, like things like this, when you focus on something else, can save you mentally, right? In from the situation that you're in.
Well, I mean, at that moment, at that time, I was in the camp already. I was in there the whole day after sun came up, and we snuck in, and we were doing this assessment and trying to figure out stuff. And then we saw all these people like kind of running out of the camp again. They were packing up all their stuff, and I was like, "What's going on?" And everyone's like, "Everybody, the rumor is that they're coming back." And I was like, "Who's coming back?" And they're like, "Whoever burned the camp last night is
What
coming
the
back to do it
hell?
again." And we're like, "Who?"
wow.
And so many rumors were flying all over the place, but those rumors were so effective that everybody started vacating the camp. And then all of a sudden, the fire started again around dusk.
What?
And we're on a hilltop with our students, and we see it happening. And then you see it's like part 2. and it's all blowing up again. But now it's the other places that were not touched the first night. And so then I'm going in, because I'm an idiot. So I go in and I'm filming this area of the camp that's on fire. And this is the movement on the ground area, which is right by the road. And this is where, and inadvertently, I was filming Mustafa's tent. And like, he was sleeping.
You didn't even know that.
I didn't know he was still in the camp. I didn't connect with him yet. But like, there was, when I think about it in hindsight later on, like, I could have been filming him while he was actually potentially still in the tent. But he had gotten out already. He woke up and had vacated that area. But I have footage of his row, like of his street in the camp. His tent is in the footage that was used in the final reports that forensic architecture used. Like, he could have been inside. Like, it's a miracle that nobody died.
It's a miracle.
It's
like
unbelievable.
How on earth, the scale of this fire, it's incredible that nobody
Yeah, but I have
died.
alternate versions in my brain. I have dreams about the fact that he did die. You know, like, it's fucked up. Like,
It could have happened.
Could have happened.
Easy, very easy.
and he could have had a whole lot more than just a burn on his arm. And when we found him at the end of the road where there was a police blockade and they were throwing tear gas at everybody, it was like, okay, the tears are from the tear gas, but are also from joy that he was alive, because then there were these messages of like all this crazy shit happening, and then he just had a little burn compared to what it could have been.
Yeah.
It's fucked up.
I think you said that it was very hard for them to live it and then document it. And I think they were pioneers. That's the burden of being a pioneer, because things didn't happen. I know that you were there for them and you helped them, but it takes courage to just do stuff and, go through this bush and, open the stuff, and then you give hope to our student right now to say, okay, this is what they did with nothing and with fear, with everybody judging them, with everybody, putting them, like blaming them and making them in the headlines, but saying they did it. I think that's amazing stuff they did, and they should be proud of it all the time, and they should continue. Yeah, I mean,
in this case, one thing that is worth mentioning, that all the footage that we archived from this period of time later on served to make a documentary, Nothing About Us Without Us.
Yeah.
It was initially commissioned by Allianz Foundation, but it went to several film festivals. It is still shown in some conferences, advocacy pieces. We use it as an advocacy tool for refugee rights, right? It's still in so many places.
And and that film is in response to the fact that they felt that the big media didn't really tell the story completely. They were like thankful that the media paid attention to what was going on, but then when we asked them a little bit more open-ended, like, no, tell us how you really feel. They were like, well, why did you use this shot? Why did you show this? Why did you not show this? Why did you leave this part out of the story? Your film is 30 minutes long, 40 minutes long, like even people that did longer pieces, and they didn't include they felt like it wasn't accurate to the experience. And so we tasked them with like, well, what would you do if you had the right to do it and yourself? And they did, and they started, and that's what that film is. So it's a really interesting meta experience watching that film to see how they were thinking about telling the story of this catastrophic experience they were just lived through. Because like they started making that film, I don't know, within the days that the new camp had opened. So it's like less than, maybe it's 2-3 weeks since the fires, right? They're just like within the first week of being in the new camp, they started that work. And I always remember the one moment when Mustafa was just like, we expected so much more of the BBC, is what he said. Like we could do, we could make the film that they made, but ours would be better. And like the level of raw confidence was really inspiring to see that they felt that way.
Because they were in, right?
Yeah.
BBC, we still did a good job given the rest of the crews probably, but they flew for what, like 5 days? They were
there for a week.
They helped us a lot. They brought a lot of food in their backpacks for our team and so on.
And they made the
when it was
film with them, and
impossible
they
to
did
get
the right
it other
thing,
way.
and they created the content with, with, not about. They co-created, and a lot of the work in the archive was used. But then that became like the thing that led to the chaos for our community as well, because then that film came out, and then boom, everyone was like, go get them. And then, then it was, I don't know. I still think of the possibility that our community could have been implicated in the actual fire itself simply because we had footage of all this shit. And we were questioned, and it was really uncomfortable. And our boys could have been any of the Moria 6. Like, it could have been us.
Yeah.
So what do you say to people who want to help refugee journalists to tell their stories? What do you give them from your experience to make it better and to include refugees? So what do you tell them?
Make it with them. Don't treat them like sources. Don't treat them like fixers. Don't use them to find the person who's going to give you your predetermined shot or your footage or your soundbite. Actually, spend the time in advance engaging with a local based community, finding out, are there people on the ground who are capable of doing this work before you spend, tens of thousands of euros flying people in to do it.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be done in without. I think there's a bit of an argument to be like, it doesn't have to just be people that are inside a story. It should be a collaboration between those who have seasoned experience as journalists and as reporters and filmmakers, doing it with the people who, are inside a story, have unbelievable access and can give you nuanced understanding of what's really going on. But that modified, engagement could be a different standard of engagement for media in general. And I think that's what we advocated a lot in terms of an impact campaign around Nothing About Us Without Us, was to say, well, can media actually change their basic approach?
Yep. Because it came from a very problematic situation, especially during COVID, for our citizen journalists, because so many different media wanted footage, but some of them were like really demanding very specific footage that came from their notion that this is how a refugee camp looks like or should look like. You spoke about it during our last Disinfo Watch with Nick, right? Like we literally got okay, crying baby, preferably next to a garbage bin, garbage bins that are not emptied and so on.
Police hitting boys,
exactly.
Police hitting teenagers, teenagers throwing rocks. It was like this list of bullshit.
And it's like, there are so many problems in refugee camps, right? But yes, and the garbage, this was always a problem, but you cannot really put it on one side. Like you cannot, of course, refugee side struggles with it. The locals, suddenly they have the second largest city in this island growing next to the capital. And how are you now sharing water? How are the cleaning of this place and everything? That's a massive challenge, right? I think also this is part of the problem why locals really didn't like media, because they were never telling the story from their point of view. But
they always got 20% or 30% of the story, because when the international media would come in and tell it, they always felt this need to have this pseudo or almost plant the flag of unbiased journalism. We had to stay in the middle, so we got to present the other side, and we also have to do the history of it. So they got to go into the context of everything, so that there's every report. It starts in 2015 with people showing up, and every report celebrates the Greeks for helping in the beginning, and then every report goes to the local.
Yeah, but it also doesn't go deep enough. Those reports were... Yeah, they showed some of human story from the locals' perspective, but when the situation got really difficult for them, nobody really showed it. And
but
yes,
if the story is about inside the camp,
of course, no. I'm not saying. I'm talking about something completely different right now, right? But what I wanted to say also about this collaboration with media, I think that so many journalists are coming with good intentions, but they have their, stereotypes. They have their notions how certain things should look like or should not look like. And if they're coming for 3 days to do a whole
that's the problem.
Piece, right? The thing is, there's this saying, learn to be a beginner every day, right? And I think that this was not present frequently. Many of the journalists, even those who we cooperated with, they were not humble enough to really just spend enough time to just listen and watch and do it every day until you really get some kind of a deeper understanding from a perspective of this person or this local, right? And it just, there was not enough time. Media don't work like this anymore.
It doesn't work like that because the news cycle forces you to push it out real fast.
Quick, you have to get it quick.
And, it's and then I think that's something that the impacted communities don't understand. So there's just like a lack of engagement across both sides, so that the journalist doesn't really spend enough time to understand and connect with the people. And this is one of the big complaints that I think all of our students had voiced in their film, was just like, take the time to know who you're reporting about and stop looking to us as victims and sources and fixers. But that side also has to understand that there's an ecosystem on the other end that's dictating when there's a deadline, when it goes out to air, what it needs to be, what's been financed, and both sides need to like actually be exposed to each other a little bit better to understand that. But then also, I think there needs to be some sense of just modification on both sides as well, because I think a lot of journalists did come down with the right intentions, come down with the right, but then they're pressed to do other stuff. And then there are these other motherfuckers who are on safari. I swear to God, it looks like they're even dressed like Hannibal Lecter at the end of the film, wandering, sauntering through in these white jackets and shooting pictures, sticking their cameras inside tents of people who are like living on the street and have nothing, and they're just like jamming their. It's so fucked up. It was really, it's like a human safari. It was really fucked up. So you saw that too, right? So I mean, all of it was on display, but we really developed really strong relationships with a lot of wonderful journalists who did the right thing, shared bylines, offered opportunities for our students to have their names in it, and then that backfired on us later when our students' names were included as creators, and then the government came after them, because they're named as the local producers, right? They were the local source and the local filmmakers and local journalists. And then it was like, oh, just go find these people.
Oh, wow.
It was so difficult to navigate that after the fact. It was
a moment of success, but...
Yeah, your biggest success became your greatest exposure.
But I think the media, the traditional media, most of them, they don't see it as a cause. They see it as a news. It's a story. So they don't see the bigger picture, how it's going to affect them. They just see it, okay, I need to take this picture, this video, and run it out, and that's it. Next. They never really grasp what's happening there.
But,
that's the issue.
and this is a massive problem on the other side, because our citizen journalists worked with so many like really big media, right? They thought that in the end somebody will first of all really follow the news, will continue the story, right? That they will like constantly check on them and be like, what is going on now? Like we want to report more on this. And this will in the end lead to improving their situation. We even had a campaign to like help them specifically, the citizen journalists, get out of the island. Remember, we recorded this hill. And it was really sad because we knew that it's not going to happen, right? That it's not going to fast track them somewhere in the asylum process. It's not going to give them priority to leave the island even. But they really fought, because journalists are also ready to promise a lot when they want the story. I'm not saying again that they're lying directly. So many of them really would like to continue, but then you go back and you're being sent to a completely different place. It's another story, and then you have a story a week. So how are you really going to do it, right? And
impacting the reality that the person is experiencing, I think, is the biggest motivator for our team to do the work, was to say, we need to shout it to the heavens to stop this, right? And we see the same thing happening now with all the footage that comes out of Gaza and all the people who are doing this work and all these journalists who are dying on a regular basis, specifically the ones who are localized. And they're like, what other evidence do you need? And you think about go into history books into World War II, and you think about the way people were like trying to get the international community to understand what was happening before it was really peeled back and discovered what was going on during the war. Like everyone was just like, they needed evidence to be able to act. And then here's the evidence. And now we live in a society where you're bombarded with the evidence, and it doesn't really move. It doesn't change the situation for the people. And it's like, it's inhuman. Like it's inhumane what happens to people. It's like really unbelievable. So, and if you're in that camp, if you're living in that space, and if you were tear gassed as you're running for help from a fire, and you're stuck in between fire and tear gas from government, like what the fuck are you supposed to think about the country that you're in? Or, like I think our students would come back with these zingers like, humanity, human rights. Are you? What is that?
I never
What
saw
is that?
It,
Like we don't know what that
How
you
does
keep
it taste?
keep telling yourself that, right? Like keep convincing yourself that you have those. Just because you wrote it down on paper 50 years ago doesn't mean that you're practicing it. And I think that that's really what our students were. That would pull them down. That would actually push them into this like kind of a bit of a depressive trough of like, why bother doing this? And then they would come out of it when they would see the value of like how important it was to do it, and then they would come back up to the surface and see that there's a chance. So that's why it took 5 years, but this is an example of a success. So I mean, and this is a message to all of them, like everybody who did this work for all those months, that like you actually did make a difference. You did change something. You did have an impact. I mean, these boys are out of prison now, but only also because of bullshit technicalities where they were wrongfully charged in the first place as adults. And then they get out and then they finally get that one, ghost witness to be seen as unreliable. Like, well, duh. For 5 years, you never even met the motherfucker.
It took them 5 years to understand.
And now he's deemed unreliable? Like, Jesus Christ. Like,
you don't have to go to law school to understand that that's not a fucking witness you can rely on. Oh, my God. All right.
Long conversation, and I think it was an emotional roller coaster.
Is this part one? Because there's so much more.
Every conversation here in the studio is part one and to be continued. And thank you very much, Doug, for going on this emotional trip with us today.
Yeah. Obviously, I wouldn't say it's my pleasure, but
Sorry,
but I still think
the conversation is
just straight up. It's so fucking cool that they're out. like, I mean, for real. But there's still, so, you know, just to cap it for a general update to everybody, like, you know, two of the Moria 6 were immediately charged as juveniles, and then they were convicted and given shorter sentences. The other 4 that were charged as adults, 3 of which were then eventually, after appeal, and after all this bullshit, were finally kicked out of the, you know, they were finally kicked to a juvenile court, and then this is where their case was finally changed to the point where they were exonerated. So they were tried as minors, finally, where they should have been tried previously after years of being incarcerated. They were actually given full exoneration. But one of them, who was charged as an adult with them, who was just over the age of, you know, becoming an adult, when they had their recent appeal, his 10-year conviction was just turned into 8. He's still facing a new appeal on that, and so he's still in prison.
Yeah, let's hope that this will be
right. So now hopefully this is a precedent for him to get, you know, here's this ghost witness, and now imagine this, like the ghost witness that is like unreliable for the boys could potentially still be deemed reliable for the quote unquote adult who's still a boy, he's still a kid, you know, but he's been in prison the whole way. Yeah. And how long did their lives have to be destroyed? So earlier I said it was cool that they could like be on the other side of it now. So now they're the plaintiffs. Versus being, and now the Greek state is the defendant. We'll see how that shakes out and if they will get compensation for their suffering.
Yeah, I think it's worth highlighting at the end that, you know, we spoke a lot about the power of citizen journalists and how this helped bringing justice to Moria 6. But on May 3rd, it's a World Press Freedom Day. And citizen journalism is one of our projects, just like this podcast, and neither has any financing right now. We were very lucky to get some grants in the past. It is not happening right now. The situation is extremely, extremely difficult with all charities, all NGOs. So we wanted to propose you one thing. We are basically putting a price on everything we have right now. So mic, studio, energy in this place, and so on. Everything has a price. And we would like to ask you to support us by donating an equivalent of 1 coffee to ReFOCUS Media Labs. Literally 1 coffee. If you're in Greece, that's probably something like less than €2. If you're in New York, well, maybe $5. If you think about this, it's nothing. It's really nothing. Give us 1 coffee and we may be able to continue this program. Thanks.